Hello, I'm Letson, and you're watching State of the Reunion. This is our first video podcast, and since it's our first, I thought it made sense to link it up with the new radio episode we have out right now. That episode is entitled, Who Is This Man? And it's the story of Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was a civil rights leader who started his career fighting for civil rights in the 40s and worked all the way until he passed away in the 80s. He just did some amazing things, but we don't really know a lot about him because he was gay. And he's sort of been written out of the history books. Now, there's definitely some really good documentaries and books about him, but when we talk about the narrative of the civil rights struggle, he tends to be left out. In the course of putting that radio episode together, we talked to a whole lot of people, and one of the people I spoke to was Mandy Carter.
And I need to say to you personally, without getting too teary-eyed, thank you. Because somewhere out there are people of color who are gay, just trying to figure out, I do matter, I do count, and what role do I get to play?
I want to say to Mandy what I didn't have the words to say right then is, Mandy, don't thank me. No, I mean, I appreciate it, but I'm doing this in this episode because, well, I owe somebody. You see, I grew up in a small town right outside of Jacksonville, Florida. It's a very conservative community. My dad's a Baptist minister, so my household specifically was pretty conservative. I didn't know any gay people, or if I did, I didn't know that they were gay. So when I became a flight attendant in my 20s, it was a completely different world for me. And what happens when you're a flight attendant is that you go to school for a couple months. When you get out of school, they send you to a base, and that base is usually in a major city. Like I was sent to Chicago. And so you're in Chicago, the airline puts you up for a week, and then they tell you, hey, you got to figure it out on your own. So everybody in my class that went to Chicago, we were, pairing up and getting roommates and getting apartments as quick as we could. I didn't have a roommate from out of my class. Everybody paired up already. And someone said, hey, Eric from another class didn't have a roommate. So I talked to Eric. Eric said he didn't have a roommate. He gave me $500 and said, go find us an apartment. I found us a nice apartment and we moved in. And I didn't know Eric before we moved in, but once we moved in, we just got along great. He was a lot of fun. And he really took care of me because, I'm from this small southern community and I'm now living in the big city, and Eric basically became my big brother. The problem with us being flight attendants, though, was that we were always on the go. So a lot of times I would be in the apartment by myself with nothing to do. Eric had a really good friend that lived in Chicago, Charles. And Charles knew that I was just hanging out in the apartment doing nothing. So Charles would call me up and he would take me all around Chicago. Charles became a really dear friend of mine. One day I come home after being on a trip for a while and I see a book on the counter. As I started reading this novel, I realized that it was a book about gay black men. So I started thinking, why is Eric reading this? And then 2 + 2 came together and I started thinking, is Eric gay? So the next time I saw Eric, I just asked him. And after beating around the bush for a while, Eric told me, yeah, he was gay. And that took me back a little bit. And then I asked him, was Charles gay? And he said yes. And that really freaked me out. Because, in my mind, I'm thinking, my roommate is gay. My best friend in Chicago is gay. And what does that say about me? So the next day I went to work and I walked down to my supervisor's office and I put in a request to transfer. And I transferred out. About 2 weeks later, I had completely moved out and I was living in Dallas. And I didn't think about Eric, I didn't think about Charles. Charles would call me sometimes and I just wouldn't accept the call. Out of sight, out of mind. A year goes by and I walk into the crew lounge and there's Eric. He was working a flight from Chicago to Dallas and he had a long layover. And I thought it would be really, really stupid for me to not go over and at least speak to him. So I went over and I started talking to Eric, and you gotta know Eric. He is the funniest person that you ever meet, with this big open heart. And so he just started talking to me like he had just seen me 2 days ago, and didn't bring up the fact that I just disappeared. We didn't even talk about it. And you know, the longer I talk to him, the more I realize, oh God, like I love this man. You know, I mean, he is a brother. You know, and as we're talking, you know, I ask him, how's Charles doing? What's Charles been up to? And he tells me that Charles is dead. He died from AIDS. And I can't even describe how I felt. This lump was in my chest, and I just kept talking to Eric and kept things light, but I could just feel it in my soul, you know. And I went home that night and I cried for hours because I just kept thinking, like, you know, what does that say about me? That I ran away from two people that I cared about because of a label that we've put on them. It just tore me up. So I called Eric that night and I apologized. And I told him I was sorry, that I loved him, and that I was wrong. But I can't apologize to Charles. He's gone. And I know that there are plenty of people of faith who have problems with homosexuality. I get that. I mean, those people are my people. Like I said, my parents are extremely conservative. So I get it. I understand it. But, you know, at the end of the day, it's about loving people above and beyond whatever labels we put on them, whether it be gay, straight, black, white, whatever. People are people. And we're put here to love each other. So, you know, I feel like, yeah, I owe Charles. I owe Eric. I owe Mandy. I owe Bayard Rustin. And maybe more importantly, I owe you, to speak from the heart. I'm Al Letson, and remember, things fall apart. Your job is to help bring them back together.